Coming up on 9:15 on the morning meeting on WCMY. It's brought to you in part by Mark Platt of Edward Jones Investments in Ottawa. For your investment needs, talk with Mark Platt of Edward Jones Investments, our neighbor over here at the corner of LaSalle and Lafayette Streets at the north end of Washington Square Park in downtown Ottawa. Maggie Frost has some time to be here.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm nice and comfy in here.
Yeah, it's nice and warm in here.
Of course.
My blanket on today.
Your office is the refrigerator.
I know it.
But you also have a door and a window.
That's true.
So I've got a door and a window, but mine's interior here.
Won't even talk about your office.
Oh, no. That's a whole other story. We have a doorbell at our building here, but we do not have a doorbell camera.
Right.
To my knowledge. A lot of people do.
Yes, they become increasingly popular.
We're going to talk about whether these are such a good idea and some privacy risks, probably.
Yes.
That you ought to give some thought to. Joining us is Paul Tracey. He's the founder and CEO of Innovative Technologies. It's a managed security service provider based in New York. He's a cybersecurity educator, a small business advocate. Hey, that's what we are. And is joining us this morning from Mr. Tracey. Are you in New York?
Yes, sir, I am, and thank you so much for having me.
We appreciate you being here with us today.
You know, Mr. Tracey, I have to ask you, it seems like in the last 5 years, these doorbell cameras have just exploded. But with that, you were quick to point out there's inherent problems. Tell us about what you've discovered.
Well, what we've seen over the last few years is an expansion of really all what we call Internet of Things devices, right? So doorbells, other kinds of security cameras, nanny cams. And what we've seen is, coming out the gate, these devices really didn't have the inherent security that they needed. Fortunately, a lot of companies have started to make those remediations. But it's very low-hanging fruit if they're not set up properly, and so this is a very easy way for hackers to get into your network.
There was, in fact, a class action suit, I believe, against Ring back in 2020. Is that the case?
That is the case. Ring suffered a great deal of credibility issue around the situation that they had. What we found out when we looked further into that situation, that a lot of the issues around Ring were actually caused by other platforms. Basically, people reusing passwords that they had somewhere else. And then what the hackers were doing is when they had those passwords, they were going to Ring and then seeing, do you have a Ring account? And so if you reused your password, they were going to get into your Ring account. So that's how most of that actually occurred.
And these doorbell cameras, are these mostly done by do-it-yourself homeowners? And is there a better idea if you have a professional operator put it in?
So there's certainly a lot of cameras that you can buy on Amazon now that promote the buy it. You can set it up yourself. We always recommend having someone check your network and make sure that it's set up properly and that it's secure. But there are certainly things that we can do as regular home users to make sure that we're not making it really easy for people to get in, right? Our password management, making sure that we have passwords on the home Wi-Fi itself, and things like that can go a long way to keep people out.
You know, I noticed just online the different price points. And I mean, I think they start at like $39 and go upwards of several hundred. Are you basically getting what you pay for, or is it does it come down to how you set it up?
So both. It's probably the more accurate answer. So we always want to go to vendors that are trusted, that are large vendors. We know they have a lot of reviews, and we can check and see that they are updating the firmware, the software that actually runs the devices, on a regular basis, and they're keeping up with security. Particularly with cameras, a lot of what happens, in particular with Amazon, is rebranding, and so you get a cheaper camera from an off-brand company that you're not really sure where it came from, these devices can actually have problems with them direct from manufacturer in the supply chain. They can have problems with them, so we always want to, stick to reputable manufacturers that we know. But just in doing that isn't going to completely solve the problem. We also have to make sure that we're taking our internal steps to secure our own networks.
And then some of these risks that you're talking about here, I suppose they're not inherent just with doorbell cameras. We're talking about if you even have some kind of a home security system with maybe video on the front porch, the back porch, and maybe the garage or any place else around the house.
Right, and so we've definitely seen it with other devices. Nanny cams fall into that category, hidden cams that you may put out on your porch. If you're having issues with packages, where, outside we see that a lot. And they make for some great YouTube videos, right? There's some really funny stuff out on YouTube from some outdoor cameras. But really, we've seen an explosion of devices that aren't computers and cell phones that are going on networks. And a lot of that is around smart homes. So even thermostats, your smart home lighting, if you have like Philips Hue and those sort of things, those devices are all connecting to the internet or to your network. And so we need to address the security around those devices the same way.
Do people even go so far as to have their system set up so that they can either call on a phone or a device or maybe send a text or whatever to tell Alexa to turn the lights on in the living room, that kind of thing?
Right. So there's a lot more ways to integrate these devices into your home and how to use them. And so there's a lot of options out there. We want to make sure, starting at the router and generally the firewall, so all your devices that you get all come with a default password. We always recommend the first thing you do when you get a new device is to change that default password, right? Because that password is going to be the same for every device that was shipped from that manufacturer. And so hackers they have programs now that are literally checking IP addresses for those username and password combinations. And so if you aren't changing that default username and password, you're basically leaving your front door open.
And you got to make those passwords fairly complicated, I suppose.
We absolutely would prefer long and complicated passwords with special characters. Ring, for instance, has now offered two-factor authentication. So any system that you're purchasing that offers enhanced encryption and two-factor authentication, we recommend that you buy those devices and utilize those features because they're going to give you the highest level of security on those devices.
I knew somebody that a lot of those programs require 8 characters or more and that kind of thing, and they use their social security number.
We just took a look at the 50 worst passwords from last year, and so we recommend now using a passphrase because it's a lot easier to remember, right? The problem with those giant passwords is like, so if I have 10 passwords, how do I remember all that? And we can get some links out of, if you have a favorite quote from a movie, a favorite line in a song, right, that's easier for you to remember, you can use variations of that because that line is going to get you a significant amount of characters without having to remember some crazy combination of something that doesn't make any, rational sense to you. And so that's one way that we can start to work on getting those longer, more complex passwords in place.
One of the things I used early on was, with capitals and symbols and things, was the addresses of where we lived when I was a kid. Street number, street name, that kind of thing.
You're better than me. I use the word password for a password.
Well,
You don't want to know how common that actually is.
And then you add a 1 and a 2 and a 3.
Mr.
Right,
Tracey.
so I think we all did that, right? We went through, and then they said, well, you needed a number, so we all put 1 at the end.
Yes.
Sure.
And then you needed a special character, so we all put the exclamation point. And that's just kind of the natural progression that you go through. But using like a quote from a song or a quote from a movie is going to make that a lot easier for you to remember. It's personal to you, and it's going to be a lot safer for you.
Back on the personal safety side, you kind of talk about a little bit about if somebody gains access to the camera feed, in addition to figuring out the packages are there, they can also kind of track your habits, and it's sort of reminiscent of when the first timers came out to put lights on, and then suddenly burglars realized, well, they've got their lights set to come on at 5:15. Is it reminiscent of that, or am I oversimplifying?
No, that's right on par with the same. It's the same information, right? We're looking at your patterns of behavior when you're home, when you're not home, whether they're doing that physically by looking at your life. So I use the analogy, if someone was sitting across the street from your house in a vehicle, right, how long would they sit there before you became concerned, maybe called the police, had somebody to look into what these people that you don't know who they are, what are they doing out there, right? The thing is, we don't see the person that's on our network if we're not looking for them, right? But that same information, you're coming and going when your kids are home alone, when your packages are sitting on the porch, and your pattern of behavior is specific to you. We generally don't want to get that information out publicly, right?
Let's talk a little bit about your book, Paul, Delete the Hacker Playbook, because a lot of what we've talked about is in there, I would assume.
It is. It goes through a lot of the top ways, the easiest ways that hackers are going to get you. I always tell everyone, if it's on a computer and it is code, it's possible to be breached, right? But we want to make that as difficult as we possibly can. And so I wrote the book to give people a baseline of protections that are easy to do and going to make an immediate improvement in your security.
You talked about Ring kind of stepping up and making changes. Are some of the other manufacturers also starting to look at the product they've put out and helping the consumer a little bit?
It's certainly happening on a macro across the board. It's definitely happening with the companies that have had issues faster than their competitors, let's say. But what we saw is really these devices are new, right? And people love them. They add a lot of value. It's great information to have. You see what's going on in your house when you're not there. And so the security needs to catch up on those devices. As soon as something new comes out, something's developed to get into it, right? So there's actually apps on the dark web now that people can buy that are designed just to break into security cameras, right? And they use the basic methods to do that, but it's allowed more people to attempt to do it. And so that's really forced companies that want to stay in business to make those changes.
Is the best bet still to go with a hardwired security system, in your opinion?
Well, that really depends. If you are looking at having that information just stored locally and you don't want to view it when you're outside of your residence, you're having it for precaution in case something does happen for insurance purposes or police reasoning, then not having something to connect you to the internet is 100% more secure than having it connected to the internet always. But generally, I think people are buying those devices for that functionality, for being able to see things at home when they're not home, and being able to look on their phones and so forth. And I think you can get to reasonable security on these devices, by using strong passwords, by making sure that you have your default passwords changed on the devices. making sure that the firmware is always updated, right? Same way you would check the batteries in your fire detectors, carbon monoxide detectors. It's never a terrible idea to set a day once a month and go through and just make sure that your stuff is updated. Sometimes automatic updates fail. And so you don't want to miss that when companies put out updates to keep you more secure.
Well, all it takes is one little chink in your armor,
Yes.
and somebody will figure out a way to get through there.
And apparently they're out there waiting, trying.
I guess. Paul, can we find you online? Any place else you want to send folks?
You can find me online at upstatetechsupport.com, or the Google search for innovative technologies in New York always works.
And then the book is titled Delete the Hacker Playbook by Paul Tracey, and that last name is Tracey.
And we thank you for your time today, sir. We appreciate it so much.
I appreciate you having me. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Paul Tracey.
All right. You never know.
Yeah, you never know.
Somebody is out there.
Yes.